You can make the case that the St. Louis Blues played their cards just right in their offer sheets of Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway of the Oilers. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Oilers options and more. But first, if you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel. As you can see, we have significantly more viewers not subscribed than subscribed. So join that subscribed little percentage there. On his 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliotte Friedman spelled out some of the ways that St. Louis Blues general manager Doug Armstrong made this as hard for the Oilers as he possibly could. Waited kind of for just the right moment to spring the trap on the Oilers, just kind of when Edmonton couldn't do another buyout anymore. And Doug Armstrong, obviously, as you offer sheet other players in the NHL, it's kind of this unwritten code that you don't do it. And if you do, you're going to see some repercussions. There's going to be a retaliatory offer sheet. Think about Jesperi Kotkaniemi, the Carolina Hurricanes offer sheeting him and getting the player after the season before Montreal had tendered an offer sheet that was matched by Carolina for Sebastian Aho. Armstrong's not really worried about that with Edmonton because the Oilers are pretty cap-strapped right now, and that's not going to change down the road because all three of Draisaitl, Bouchard, and Connor McDavid are going to need contracts. So at this point, there's no doubt that St. Louis's offer has put the Oilers into a super tough decision. It's not an easy matter to suddenly come up with the cap space that they're going to need to retain both players, and it's going to give the team that much less wiggle room as the year goes on as well. Don't forget that one of the most important players to this team, Mattias Ekholm, was a trade deadline acquisition, and if you are right up against that salary cap ceiling, making a move during the season, it makes it all the more difficult to do that. And imagine this team without Mattias Ekholm. Sometimes an opportunity presents itself, though, and that's kind of what that's where I'm going with this for the Edmonton Oilers. And there's news now this week that Evander Kane is going to need surgery. He obviously suffered problems with a sports hernia, and he had some hip issues in the playoffs. Again, on the 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliotte Friedman reported that one issue dragging things out has been Kane and the Oilers finding the right doctor, but Friedman said that, quote, eventually Kane will have the surgery, and he's going to be out months, and I'm not talking 1 or 2 months. I think he's going to be out longer than that. Friedman also said he didn't know if the recovery from the injury would take Kane through the regular season and into the playoffs, but he did say that he had some people say to him that there's no guarantee Kane is going to be out that long. So I thought that based on Kane's strong playoff performance and the fact that this surgery usually takes 3 months to recover from, that hopefully we're going to not have a super long absence of Evander Kane, but that might not be the case, especially, like I said, he has both hip issues and a sports hernia problem that have been bugging him since the playoffs. So if there's multiple issues here, we could see Kane out longer as well. The NHL collective bargaining agreement allows for teams to make offer sheets to restricted free agents. You saw, of course, Armstrong do that with Broberg and Holloway. One of the other things that's in the CBA, as has been the controversy for years now, is the LTIR, having players go on LTIR for lengthy periods of time, come back for the playoffs, and then when they come back, their cap hit does not apply to the cap hit of the team in the playoffs. So if Evander Kane's out and needs surgery, maybe it's time for the Oilers to push the envelope on this rule, just like Vegas and Tampa Bay have done as well. Stan Bowman did it in Chicago when he was with the Chicago Blackhawks. So maybe if Kane stays on LTIR all season, that will give the aged and banged up power forward that's important, that this is an older guy and he plays a very physically engaged style of play. So you give this guy plenty of time to recover and fully heal and build that body back up for the end of the season when things really matter in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So the only season that really matters to the Oilers is the playoffs. So would you rather take Kane at 100% just for the playoffs, or would you like to take Kane at 70% for the rest of the season, and then he's going to drop a gear in the playoffs because he's tired and he's not fully recovered from the injury? So maybe another player or two is going to get injured as well, and there's more urgency in Kane getting back into the lineup. But there's kind of some playing room here. If Evander Kane does go on LTIR, at least at the start of the season, there will be cap space to get these contracts done, and you can play the revolving game of the LTIR dance. Bowman's done it. Vegas just won the Stanley Cup doing it. So is it foolproof? No. Is it an option? Yes, especially with one of your highest earning players needing surgery. If you've been paying attention to Oilers news, it's been nothing but contract talk, which is understandable. Leon Draisaitl's obviously in the middle of a contract negotiation that's been very covered, very speculated upon, and now you've got these two. But the question for the Edmonton Oilers has also been, is there going to be player movement? Is there going to be an in or an out that either helps cap space or helps positionally? Really, if in my opinion, there's no need for Edmonton to panic here, because Kane's surgery looks like it will give Edmonton whatever it needs to make any decision they kind of want with these two players. And you can argue either way, right? You can make the argument that you keep both, you keep one, you keep the other. But to look at specifically what the options at the disposal of the team are in terms of what's next if these guys walk, I definitely say more likely than not, if one of them is going to leave, it's going to be Philip Broberg. That's a lot of money for a guy who hasn't really proven himself in anything but the end of last season's playoffs. And that's a pretty good proof of concept, but is it $9 million worth of a proof of concept? I don't know about that. There's the element of the, why don't we just let Broberg go, take the second round pick, and then flip that pick to bring in a right shot defenseman. And on paper, it sounds pretty simple. Broberg could be overpaid at that $4.5 million. So why not flip the asset? Well, you're not just going to snap your fingers and make the trade. You're going to need another team that's going to make this trade with you. Maybe that second round pick is enough to get that kind of defenseman they're looking for. Maybe it's not. Maybe that second round pick from the St. Louis Blues is going to make it easier for the Oilers to part with another first round pick. But if it is Philip Broberg that leaves, which again, I'm not saying the Oilers should let him go. I'm just saying based on the money, he would be the more likely player to depart, in my opinion. So if there's no Broberg and Edmonton needs to upgrade their defense, which I would say they do if Broberg leaves, what happens? You could look ahead to next year's free agents and see who is in the final year of their contract this year, because crucially, teams are always more willing to retain salary, and a higher portion of salary at that, when they're only doing so on a one-year contract, a short-term contract. Don't forget that last year, Anaheim was willing to retain as much as was necessary. Edmonton ended up getting Adam Henrique for only a quarter of his cap hit at the deadline because of the way they made the cap space work with the extra team as well. But here's the problem here. I could drop a bunch of names right now that sound like a dream to add to the Oilers' back end. I've seen Neil Pionk's name floated. I've seen David Savard's name floated. I've seen Henry Jokiharju's name floated, but there's issues with all of those. Pionk is going to be expensive in every way. He's got a cap hit just shy of $6 million, even if it is just for one more season. But Winnipeg's still trying to win. They're kind of right at the end of a competitive window. So why would they trade their number 2 defenseman? I would say that's not an option. Henry Jokiharju is a right shot defenseman on a Buffalo Sabres team with a long-standing hole in that position. Plus, they also want to compete for a playoff spot, so they're probably not moving him. In terms of the three I just said, I think that David Savard is the best in terms of fit. I think he might actually be able to bring out the best in Darnell Nurse, right? Like, think about what Ekholm did for Evan Bouchard in his role. Obviously, to a lesser extent would the Savard-Nurse case be, but Ekholm's presence in the defensive zone took a lot of weight off Bouchard's back, and it kind of allowed him to exceed at what his specific game is, while Ekholm filled in the gaps. Well, I think Savard could do a similar thing for Nurse. Question is Savard good enough? I'd personally be happy with him, but I got to tell you, I do have a feeling Stan Bowman's going to be shooting a little bit higher than him. Think about it. Bowman and Knoblauch until now have been operating under the assumption that, more likely than not, they were going to have Philip Broberg ready to step into a significant role as an important top 4 defenseman next season. And don't get me wrong, I think Savard Nurse, save for maybe a deficiency of foot speed, is a pretty good pair, but for a team with cup aspirations, is Bowman going to think that's good enough? The last guy I have my eye on is Seattle's Adam Larson, who has just a year left at $4 million, but he left Edmonton in 2021 to get a fresh start after going through some personal problems. He had some issues related to his family, so Larson would have to be on board for a return, and with, of course, the nature of his departure, there's no guarantee that that would be the case. So what's the conclusion here? Outside of the guys that I just rattled off, I've seen Jan Ruda's name, I've seen Justin Hall's name, I've seen Dante Fabro's name kind of thrown out there, but they kind of fall into the same Savard category of the are they good enough? And I think all those names would fit not as well as Savard with Nurse on that right side. The Oilers also might just end up matching the offer sheet to Philip Broberg and keep him around, but to be honest, matching that offer sheet would have to be a pretty significant overpayment. And while we're talking about the defense this whole time, I haven't really touched too much on Dylan Holloway yet, and the whole defense personnel, the cap space management, the potential trade or LTIR chips aside, I really think Holloway needs to stay. I thought he was really, really good at the end of the season and in the playoffs last year, and to me, he screams guy you win the cup with for me. I really love middle six forwards who can be as effective filling in for an injury on the first line as taking reps on the penalty killer in the bottom six. And I think Holloway showed that last year. It's not that you can't find a different Holloway. Edmonton had a few guys last season who kind of fit that middle six forward who can play anywhere archetype. I was and I am a huge fan of Warren Foegele for that reason. But the price is good enough. And even if Holloway doesn't fit long term, I think you could fetch a better return from him if you match the offer sheet and then explore a trade later than what you could if they choose not to match. So that's going to be it for me today. If you're an Oilers fan and you've been, trying to figure out what's going to happen, I got news for you. Nobody really knows what's going to happen with this team. Stan Bowman's got some time to figure out if he wants to match the Philip Broberg and the Dylan Holloway offer sheets. But for the most part right now, it's hurry up and wait for Oilers fans, for Oilers Nation. Let's just hope everything goes as positively as it can. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.